Power Rangers Dino Thunder, a 2004 release for the Nintendo Gamecube, also available for PlayStation 2, and loosely based on the 2004 incarnation of the same name, is one of those games where you generally have to keep your expectations really low in regards to overall quality. After all, this is a licensed product based on a kids show, and it was originally released as a budget level game, which is often the 3 cardinal kisses of death for your video game. Now, generally speaking, when it comes to video games based on the Power Rangers franchise, specifically anything beyond the initial Mighty Morphin wave, my experiences had been less than stellar. So my expectations for this game in particular were pretty low coming into this, and that was probably a good thing because with extremely low expectations, Power Rangers Dino Thunder on the GameCube is fairly decent fare. That is to say, fairly decent fare for kids, not so much anyone else. Dino Thunder's main gimmick here is that it's comprised entirely of Zord fights, which means no Ranger action in any way, shape, or form. You're just controlling the Dino Zords and blowing up other monsters roaming around this enclosed open world thing while looking for morphers and dino eggs to unlock other Zords and things. But before you can call this Power Rangers Dino Thunder the Fighting Edition, know that this is not a fighting game. That much is obvious just looking at the gameplay. Now, whenever you start a new game, you begin with just the Tyrannosaur, which can roam around, jump, and shoot projectiles. And as you progress through the game's various missions, you'll eventually unlock the additional Rangers and their various Dinozords, each of which have their own specific strengths and weaknesses. Collecting power-ups will allow you to stock up on speed boosters and special move stocks that enable you to perform a special move that can be used for specific situations depending on the mission you're partaking in. But for the most part, each Zord has different attributes and characteristics. Some Zords can take more hits than others, Pterazord can fly, Tricerazord can deflect shots with its head, and so on and so forth. So each Zord has their uses, and in some missions you'll be required to use them in order to succeed. So getting that out of the way, what do you do in Power Rangers Dino Thunder? Well, Dino Thunder has you going on missions to perform tasks, whether it be destroying specific targets, collecting items and bringing them towards an invisible portal, or defending the utterly worthless Brachiozord against enemy fire, among other things. Completing a mission enables the next mission, but you can always go back and attempt missions you've already cleared, which serves the purpose of tracking down dino eggs, or maybe trying to perform well enough to earn dino gems, whose main purpose is to unlock various bits of moves, as well as Zords for the bonus power games, more on that later. There's about 6 main hub worlds, each of which has a number of missions for you to complete before being able to access other worlds, and each world has its own set of morphers that you can collect in an effort to unlock more power games. Again, more on that later. Here's the deal, when it comes to controlling Dino Thunder, it's fairly decent, it's responsive, it's functional, and despite the number of functions available, it's relatively simple to get into the control scheme for the most part. You're mostly using 2 buttons anyway, with the occasional tap on the other 2 for whenever you need to switch between Zords or execute a special attack. However, the Zords themselves are practically weightless, feeling less like giant machines of mass destruction and more like controlling smaller animals. I suppose I could applaud the designers for making the Zords feel lighter than they should in an attempt to make the overall gameplay seem more lively, but the main problem is that despite all the side quests, the so-called open-ended worlds, and the variation of Zords at your disposal, Dino Thunder is mind-numbingly dull. The missions you partake in are fairly basic and get repetitive after a while, especially missions where you're fetching dino DNA to bring to a portal, or trying to destroy crystals within a time limit. Your enemies comprise totally generic creatures like lobster, robots, and ice worms, lava worms, things that warp you to another part of the level, and a couple other varieties. All of these can be killed in one hit, with some mission-specific exceptions. Despite the open-endedness of the various worlds, there's very little incentive to go out and explore because there's nothing here worth seeing. The overall blandness of these worlds mean they're fairly easy to get lost in, especially in the jungle world or lava fields. A map feature would have been nice to have in order to keep track of where you're at. Certainly would help in giving you some idea on where to go to seek out your next target or something, because you're not really given much in terms of hints. Yeah, Dino Thunder is a bit boring, which is the last thing you would expect from a game with giant robots to be, but there you go. But wait! I'll pretend you cried. What about the mighty Megazord? The big thing that combines all the Zords to one big robot. Isn't that in the game? Well, yeah, it's in the game, but all you do is shoot at the boss cell tracks to stun him and then use your special attack a number of times to beat him. Lame, it's not even worth mentioning. The main adventure itself is relatively short, only 24 missions through the 7 worlds, and it'll probably take you up to a couple hours or less to complete. All of that is entirely dependent on whether you feel like going for the bigger accomplishments, like going for dino gems, by replaying missions better, or seeking out the various dino eggs and morphers to unlock power games. Essentially the same deal, except self-contained, and even including areas and Zords from the prior 2 seasons, Ninja Storm and Wild Force, once they're unlocked of course. On the surface, it's not a bad deal and a bit of an incentive to try and unlock Zords from past seasons, but much like the main missions, the games are rather mundane. Some are defense missions, some involve smashing crystals, and some are, oh yes, the rings! On top of that, picking a power game restricts you to a specific Zord, which means no swapping between Zords during the actual power games. You have the free roaming segments where you can swap between Zords and fiddle around, but there's no real reason other than to find the mission markers. There's no hidden things to fetch, no enemies to fight, nothing worth exploring, which is rather disappointing. But nowhere near as disappointing upon learning that when you get right down to it, the various Zords from Ninja Storm and Wild Force are really just reskins of the existing Dino Thunder Zords. They just act the same way, they just look a bit different. Pretty much. Dino Thunder sports some really bland, really dull looking visuals. I'm not really going to give too much crap to the CGI cutscenes because, well, that's pretty much standard fare for budget level CGI. Even with that said though, they're alright for the most part, with the Rangers resembling their life counterparts for the most part, and even Dr. O's lab resembles the one from the show. There's even some recycled stock footage from the show itself for the various Zord transformations and things of that nature. That I've got no real issue with, but when it comes to the in-game graphics, they're pretty dull. The various worlds are generally uninteresting. Reefside City is a generic-looking city with an invisible wall surrounding the immediate block and buildings you can't destroy. The canyon and tar pits levels are dark, dreary, and uninteresting. The only really decent-looking levels are the lava fields and the volcanoes, mostly because the lava looks halfway decent, but even then these levels are generally dull. The various Zords you get to unlock, while they do a good job of resembling their TV show counterparts, they pretty much look like toys. Too plasticky, too stiff, some of the special effects are so-so. It's a budget title, so you can't really expect much, and as such, it is what it is, so that's that. Sound-wise, well, I'd just like to replay this opening clip featuring the outstanding bargain basement voice acting.
I managed to get away, but Tyranno is low on power.
Okay, let me see if I can get in contact with them. It's a long shot, but maybe they are still in communication range. Kira, Ethan, do you read me?
Now, on a whole, it's alright. The voice actors did the best they could with the material given, and it's really only one guy for the majority of the game, so it's not utterly terrible. But it's also very clear as day that it isn't the original actors from the Dino Thunder TV show doing the voice work. Which is funny because when it came to the Lightspeed Rescue and Time Force games on the consoles, they actually got the actual Ranger actors to do the voice work. But here they got some nameless, barely sound-alikes. Your mileage may vary as to whether Dr. O not being voiced by Jason David Frank is a game breaker or not, but personally, I like the barely sound-alike better.
I know you can. Don't worry. I'll be here with you every step of the way.
Setting that piece of business aside, sound effects are rather... Music is quite a departure from the season it's based on, which incorporates lots of pseudo rock tunes of generic nature. Now you got some ill-fitting orchestral music plumped from a stock music generator or something. Doesn't really work for me. Music's entirely forgettable. It's just sort of there. What isn't there is any semblance of the Power Rangers Dino Thunder theme, which kind of sucks because that's actually one of the better themes of the Disney run. Oh well. Overall, as far as Power Ranger games produced under the THQ banner goes, Power Rangers Dino Thunder, it's actually halfway decent, which is far from high praise, but it is something, I suppose. For a budget level title, it's mildly playable. There's a bit to do in regards to the main story, the fetch quests, and the mini levels, and there's potential for something good. But on the flip side, the core gameplay is dull and repetitive, the missions are uninspired, the visuals are equally lackluster, and the overall package just feels a bit barren. I suppose the kids might get some semblance of enjoyment out of this game, and in all honesty, it's not the worst Power Rangers game ever committed to digital media. It's passable fare at best, but fare with very little meat to it. Whatever.